It was about 7 a.m. when Jerry emerged from the depths of sleep. His first thought upon waking was, "It's Sunday. I have to go to work tomorrow." He didn't pay that fact any real attention, though. Instead, he rolled around in bed for a bit, trying to fall back asleep. When that didn't work, he threw the covers off and got up. Jerry left his bedroom and went straight for the coffee machine, the one thing he looked forward to in the morning. He made up his coffee the way he liked and sipped it while reading at the dining table. He did this for about half an hour or so, then got up and rinsed his mug in the sink. Next, he planned on pitching the K-cup into the garbage, but found the bin empty without a bag. It dawned on him that he never replaced the previous one when it filled. He glanced over by the front door, and sure enough, there was the full trash bag leaning against the doorframe. With a quick sigh through his nostrils, Jerry set to work putting a fresh bag in the bin and sliding on his sandals to take the old bag out. He locked the door behind him once he was out of his apartment and in the dingy hallway. Stained and bulging ceiling tiles greeted him, and sickly yellow lights lit the corridor. With the brown carpet underfoot, Jerry was always reminded of piss and shit when he had to leave, which was a pretty apt description for the building he had to live in. But the rent was right, and so was the location, so he got what he paid for. Besides, the property managers had just put in a new elevator car, so he no longer had to risk his life taking the old screaming metal death trap or kill himself taking the stairs. Silver linings, Jerry told himself as he descended to the bottom floor. The basement was another hallway similar in appearance to Jerry's own, though instead of aged drywall, it was pitted concrete covered in layer upon layer of white paint. There were 2 exits on either side of the hall, and both led outside to the parking lot behind the building. Jerry went to the right, passing the laundry room, workout center, and a couple of units. He took note of the silence as he moved, because he felt like he was disturbing it. It may have been early on a Sunday, but usually he'd hear something walking through the halls. A TV blaring the morning news, people shuffling about as they made breakfast, quiet conversations between roommates or lovers, something, anything, to break up the dead quiet he now found himself in. The silence continued on to the rest of the world when Jerry stepped out into the chilly air. A dense fog had rolled in during the night, obscuring everything beyond the edges of the parking lot. Even the sun was surrounded in the haze, giving it an almost cone-like shape with a bright ball at its center. There were maybe a dozen cars parked in the lot, which seemed right to Jerry, but it only added to the question of why he hadn't heard a single person stirring inside. With a mental sort of shrug, he weaved between a pair of cars, careful not to knock them with his trash, and made his way toward the dumpster. As it came into view, however, he froze. There was a leg protruding from inside the dumpster. It was pale and slim, the exposed part being from the knee down, with a ruby red heel dangling off the toes. It jutted toward the sky like an antenna, the sparkling red of the heel posing as the aircraft's signal light. Jerry stared at the thing, mesmerized by its beauty and rooted in place by its implications. His apartment was in the middle of town, for God's sake. How in the hell had somebody dumped a fucking body in the dumpster without anyone seeing? He left his phone upstairs, so he'd have to go inside to call the cops. But the moment had him so tightly wound he couldn't turn away. Then, the leg twitched. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was quick and lumpy, like a dying animal's muscle spasms. Slowly, the foot relaxed from its upward point, letting the heel fall back into proper place, and it rolled like someone getting the kinks out after a long day walking. Jerry could hear soft pops and clicks as the heel joint twisted. It rose upward out of the dumpster, higher and higher, until the back of the knee emerged. With almost 4 feet of calf exposed, the leg bent to place the heel on the ground. Spindly fingers rose from the sides of the box and wrapped around its edges. The fingernails were painted the same ruby red as the heel. Instinct kicked in for Jerry. He dropped the garbage bag and ran inside. He didn't even consider the elevator, opting instead to bolt up the stairs 3 at a time. By the time he reached his apartment, he was heaving breaths, but managed to grab his phone off the counter. The screen came to life and he dialed 911. As it rang, he moved tentatively over to his patio door, which overlooked the parking lot. He peeked outside and found the dumpster empty, a sight which filled him with equal measures of dread and relief. The phone still rang when he heard the groan of bending metal from below. He felt himself again rooted to the spot as the phone rang on and more metal groaned beneath him, crawling closer. Some short, digital beeps and boops came from the phone, then a robotic voice said,
"We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service. If you feel you have reached this recording in error, please check the number and try your call again."
A hand the size of a car tire rose up from beneath Jerry's balcony and gripped the metal railing so tightly it bent the bars. The phone slid from his hand and clattered to the floor. Another large hand appeared to his left and grabbed onto the railing as well, followed by the top of a woman's head emerging from below. It stopped just as her eyes breasted the balcony. Despite her other distortions, the woman's head was entirely normal from what Jerry could see. Her dirty blonde hair hung down heavy and straight, as if soaked, and her emerald green eyes shone. There were no wrinkles on her forehead, and her gaze seemed relaxed. For a few seconds, they just stared at one another. Jerry, feeling out the woman's intent, and her, examining him with calm apathy. The woman's head slid below the edge of the balcony again, and her arms became taut as her grip tightened. Before he could register her plan, Jerry watched the gangly woman heft herself over the railing and crash into the patio door. The thick glass wobbled and the frame creaked, but both held fast as the woman pressed herself flat against the door. Jerry stumbled back, almost tripping over the coffee table behind him. He noticed the woman's dress, which was the same shade as her heels and nails. Nails that were now scratching the glass like a dog begging to be let back inside. Her breath was hot on the glass, fog forming and disappearing in tune with her ragged breaths. At first, Jerry just stared in abject shock at the sight. Not even 30 minutes ago, he'd been waking from a dreamless sleep and dreading the coming workday, a thought which, now, seemed silly. His legs maneuvered around the coffee table. His torso twisted in response. His head never turned from the woman, though. His eyes bore into hers. Her once blank expression had been replaced with a puppy-like joy. Her tongue even flopped out and licked the glass. Jerry continued backing away from the door. The woman's scratching hands turned to fists, and they started pounding on the glass. Her expression shifted, concern edging out the joy. Jerry reached the front door, and his left hand scrambled against its metal surface until he found the brass knob. He twisted it slowly, then began pulling the door open. She balled up one fist and pulled it back from the patio door. It struck with blinding speed and ferocity, leaving a perfectly round hole in the glass. The bloodied hand reached down and unlocked the door. Jerry broke his gaze and ripped the front door wide open. He leapt through it and slammed it shut behind him as the woman staggered into his apartment. Wasting no time, he sprinted to his left, down the hall towards the opposite end of the building. He reached the door leading to the staircase just as his apartment door flew open, almost breaking off its hinges. He didn't wait to see her emerge, he just ran. The first flight of steps went smooth, but he tripped at the top of the second flight and fell ass over tea kettle to the floor. Pain flared all over his body, but there was no time to wallow in it. Jerry groaned as he pushed himself to his feet and out the exit. The cool morning air felt good on his face, but the fog remained. He stumbled on the sidewalk and had to lean on a streetlight for support. His breaths came long and haggard, as if he'd just run a marathon. The pain throbbed in every nerve, and his vision began to swim, but he pressed on, heading to his right toward the town square. If anyone was out here, they would be there. At least, he hoped. It was slow going. His right leg was particularly burning, so he shuffled more than he walked. Not a single person or car passed him on the street. There were no ambient sounds, not even birdsong. Only his hard breathing and scraping footsteps accompanied Jerry on his journey to the square. He hadn't seen the woman in red since he left his apartment, and he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Not seeing her was much scarier, but at least he wasn't in any imminent danger. About 10 minutes later, Jerry found himself in the town square, which was really just a patch of grass with some trees, benches, and walking paths surrounded by small shops. Not a single other person could be seen or heard. With his legs still throbbing, Jerry found the nearest bench and collapsed into it. He was still breathing fast and heavy, but he wasn't sucking air through his mouth anymore. He rubbed his sore leg and leaned back to look skyward with closed eyes. His mind scrambled for ideas, but all it produced was a low buzz like a TV tuned to static. Something might come to him if he listened to it long enough, but Jerry knew he was just grasping at smoke. A snapping twig from his front pulled Jerry's attention back to reality. His head snapped forward, and when his eyes opened, he saw her there, holding two halves of a broken stick in her stringy fingers. Her left hand was glittering with shards of glass and dripping blood, but she either didn't notice or didn't care. Looking at her now, Jerry got a sense of her full height, which was somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 12 feet. She was slouching though, so it was hard to be sure. She looked sad, her mouth drooping at the corners. Her previous strength but a ghost in her current demeanor. Those emerald green eyes watched him, and they swam in captured tears. Jerry reached over with his left hand and patted the seat beside him. Cop a squat. At the sound of his voice, the woman perked up. He patted the seat again. She strode over and stood before him. He patted the seat a third time. You don't want to sit? She dropped the sticks and reached down to grab Jerry under his arms. In spite of her slim form, she hefted him like he weighed nothing. His entire skeleton popped with fresh pain at the movement, but he hardly noticed. She held him out before her like a cat who had just had a good lick of something they weren't supposed to. Then, she pulled him into a hug. Time slowed to a crawl in her arms, and Jerry became confused. He considered hugging her back, but struggled with the thought. So instead, he just stayed limp like a cheap doll. She snuggled her head into the crook of his neck, and he tensed at the thought of a sudden bite. Ripping flesh and pouring blood would surely follow, but they didn't. Instead of an assault on his bloodworks, she sniffed him. Sniffed him. It was a deep inhale, like people do when they think they smell popcorn. She took in his scent for well over 30 seconds, then exhaled long and slow. Exhaustion settled on Jerry's shoulders as she pulled back from him. His eyelids grew heavy and his whole body turned comfortably numb. She placed him down on the bench in a sitting position, then sat down beside him with one arm around his shoulders. Panic rose in his mind, but it was muted, drowned by the contentment which had rolled in. I'm dying. The thought came with no frills or excitement. It was a statement of fact. The woman leaned over and kissed him on the temple, then rested her head on his shoulder. Darkness encroached on the edges of Jerry's vision. He fought it for as long as he could, a time which could have been measured in seconds. Then, he fell into a big sleep.